Hi and welcome back to Discover Newport YouTube channel. My name's Kevin. I'm a white badge guide for Newport, and today's video is going to be looking at Sir Charles Morgan. Now, Sir Charles Morgan is considered to be the father of modern Newport. This is a bronze cast statue. It was first erected in 1850, 4 years after his death, and it was originally placed at High Street and Bainswell Road Junction. Then moved up to St Wallace Cathedral, or just outside there, and since 1992 it's been located here in Bridge Street, a fitting place for the father of Newport. So let's have a quick look at the statue, and then we'll go grab a coffee and we'll look more at the man. Who was the man? What did he do for Newport? And what legacy has he left? Okay, so here we are at the Riverside Theatre. We were just stopped off for a quick cup of coffee at the cafe. Very nice outside terrace overlooking the river. One of the best places for coffee in Newport on a sunny day. So let's get back to Sir Charles Morgan, the father of Newport, and what he did. And can we understand the guy, and what did he think? So he was born in 1760. He was born as Charles Gould. He was not a member of the Morgan family, and his father was Charles Gould. So what we'll do for the sake of this video is, for the father we'll call him Sir Charles or Charles the Elder. For Sir Charles we'll call Sir Charles, and Sir Charles also had 8 children, the eldest of which was called Charles. So for him we'll call him Sir Charles the Younger, just to try and keep our hierarchy of inheritance and generations. So Charles Gould was an MP, or Charles Gould the Elder was an MP for Brecon. He had a modest estate around Breconshire, and he married Jane Morgan, who was a part of the Morgan family, in 1758. Now, Charles the Elder was also the Judge Advocate General, so he looked after the discipline in the army. This was at the time a parliamentary post, a government post. It's now part of the judiciary and away from politics, but back then it was a part of the government, and he had a lot to do. This was the time of the American War of Independence. We had the Ireland issue. It hadn't yet been incorporated into the United Kingdom or Great Britain. That the Act of Union was still to come, and we also, of course, had the Napoleonic Wars. So as head of army discipline, court martials, legal investigations and the like, he had quite a lot to do. Now, as an MP, he didn't really go to Parliament that often. He tried to avoid it. He only went for local issues on Brecon and anything to do with his post as Judge Advocate General. He wasn't highly thought of in that post. Some thought it was beyond his capabilities, but he kept it until just a few months before his death, when he retired. Now, in 1792, by a pure fluke, Jane Morgan inherited the Morgan estate. She had 3 brothers, all of whom were superior to her in inheritance, and amazingly, all 3 brothers died without leaving an heir. So in 1792, Jane inherited the vast Tredegar estate. She was aged 59 then. Charles the Elder, Charles Gould the Elder, her husband, was 66, so he was well mature in his years, and our Sir Charles, or back then known as Charles Gould, was 32. Now, Sir the Elder, Charles, didn't take, wasn't at ease with his newfound wealth. It was reported in the local London papers that if you wanted to meet one of the wealthiest men in Britain, which he became, then it was no good going to his estate or to his chateau. The place to find him was in a small room, 2 floors up, in a small Islington guest house, because that's where he stayed when he was doing his work as the Judge Advocate General. It did not sit well with him, his vast estate at that age. He was expecting to live his days on a very modest estate in Brecon. Uh, our Charles, who was to become Sir Charles, was expecting to inherit his father's estate and follow in his father's footstep. At the time, our Charles, was in the military and fully, totally unexpected to become heir of this vast estate. So, at the age of 17, our Sir Charles, or Charles Gould, then joined the Coldstream Guards as an ensign. This was the lowest um, commissioned officer rating that you could join as. Today it's called a second lieutenant, but he joined at the age of 17 the Coldstream Guards. He was taken prisoner in his early 20s during the American War of Independence at the Battle of Yorktown, and he had quite a good military career. He retired in 1792 as Lieutenant Colonel to help look after this new vast estate that came there, found its way when Jane inherited Tredegar. So Charles Gould was 32 when he became heir to both the Tredegar estate and also the Brecon estate for his father. Now, when his mother died in 1797, he became the owner of the Tredegar estate. And when his father died in 1806, he inherited the Brecon estate. So the two combined under him, and he became the second baronet of the Tredegar estate. And he, at that time, was also an MP. And as one of the richest men in Britain and one of the largest estates, it was said that he could get on a horse in Cardiff, at his stables just outside Cardiff, and ride all the way to Hereford without leaving his estate. That was how big it was. It was that combined Tredegar and Brecon estate covered most of Gwent up into Breconshire, across into Cardiff, across towards Herefordshire, and of course he had his Southern English estates as well. So Charles became an MP in 1787, before the inheritance, and he was a Liberal Tory, much like his father. His father was also a Liberal Tory. So in the Margaret Thatcher's days, this would have been the Tory Reds. Today, it would be One Nation Toryism, Conservatism. So he was very much on the left of the party, very much a reformer, very much a moderniser, and a great supporter of Lord Liverpool's time as Prime Minister. Now, during this time, a lot of reforms happened. So some of the changes that happened under Lord Liverpool and supported by Sir Charles was the Combinations Act. Now, this was the repeal of the Combinations Act. Combinations Act effectively banned trade unions and collective bargaining and collective groups of workers. This was repealed with the support of Sir Charles. Another one was the Jails Act. This reformed prisons. At the time, before the Jails Act, prisoners had to pay for their own upkeep and they had to pay for the services of the jailer. And those who had the money had a very easy life in prison. Those who didn't had a very rough life in prison. But the Jails Act changed that, and it meant that jailers were actually paid a salary from the government to look after prisoners, and conditions vastly improved. And indeed, as MP, Sir Charles was not adverse to using his influence to get the best things for him and his constituency, and he lobbied for and got the new prison at Usk, which is now the Usk prison. So that was brought in by Sir Charles Morgan as part of his MP. The other things that happened was the Cotton Mills Act, again supported by Sir Charles. This was stopped the use of children under the age of 9 from working in the mills, and under the age of 16, children were restricted to 12 hours work a day. So We also saw the introduction of the penal code, very reforming. This eradicated the death penalty from a vast swathe of criminal acts and reserved the death penalty purely for the most serious crimes such as treason and murder. So Sir Charles fully supported Lord Liverpool, big fan of his, and very much a reformer on the parliamentary front. So what else did Sir Charles do as an MP? Well, he presented petitions to Parliament against the Test Act. Now, the Test Act at the time prevented Catholics from entering any positions of government power or becoming an MP or anything like that. In fact, it prevented anybody who was not a confirmed and baptised Church of England Anglican from entering any position of power. So he petitioned against that, and he voted in favour of the Trinitarian Act, which allowed the more non-conformist Anglicans, such as the Methodist and Baptist, to hold power and become an MP. So he voted against that. In 1827, he presented a petition against. 1826, he presented a petition against the truck payments. So that was the ending of truck shops, which were owned by mine owners. They would pay their miners in tokens, and those tokens had to be spent in the mine's shop. So he voted against that for cash payments to workers. In 1826, he voted for, or he presented a petition for the abolition of slavery. Now, the 1807 Slave Trade Act didn't free the slaves. It stops trading in slaves, but if you were already a slave, it didn't give you freedom. It just meant you couldn't be sold on to another owner and be left taken away from your family. So he voted for he brought in a petition calling for the immediate freeing of the slaves in 1826. So in 1830, he presented another petition to support for the payment of wages, or to prevent the payment of wages in goods. So a mill owner couldn't give his workers a couple of rolls of cotton in exchange for their time. They had to be paid in cash. So he presented petitions against that as well. Now, Lord Liverpool's government ended in 1828 in the election, and the coalition government under the Duke of Wellington was formed. And Sir Charles said of that, a government formed on the principles of Lord Liverpool's will forever meet through the support of myself and family. So very much a reforming MP, very much in favour of changes to the way things were going, very much a benefactor to the people of Newport, and supported that. And his son, Sir Charles the Younger, also presented a petition in the following year, 1827, also calling for the abolition of slavery. Now, Sir Charles the Younger actually crossed over the floor and sat on the benches of the Whigs, which was to become the Liberal Party. So while both Sir Charles the Elder and Sir Charles themselves were very much Tories, although to the left of the party, at Sir Charles the Younger, he became a Liberal and sat with the Whigs. So despite all of this very reforming action and support, Sir Charles was still a businessman. He had become one of the wealthiest men in Britain. He had one of the largest estates in Britain. Up in the north, he had the minefields of the valleys. Down here in Newport, he had the River Usk and its dockyards, or wharfs, along the river. Very busy wharfs. At that time, before he did anything, the estate was generating about £40,000 a year in profit, equivalent today of about £5 million a year in profit. That was mainly from agriculture and cattle breeding, and also dock fees. So the wharf fees for boats tying up at the wharf and unloading, and the dockyard. So he made his money from the rents from that. But this was a man in his mid-30s. He was ambitious. He was all about modernising, and he wasn't too worried about using his position in power in Parliament to get what he needed. So he used it to push forward bills for the development of the docks. He pushed forward bills for the development of railways to bring the coal down into Newport from the valleys, and he also pushed for the legislation required to build canals. So he invested heavily in infrastructure and made his money from infrastructure. The mines he didn't run himself, he leased out the mines, but he took a payment for how much of the minerals came out. This was mainly coal and iron. He also made his money from the fees for the railways, fees from the canals, fees from docks. So he grew the town. When he first came into the legacy of Tredegar, Newport, in the late 1790s, was a town of about 1,000 people. Within 30 years, it had grown to 20,000 people. It was a growing town based on trade, pushing out coal and iron from the Welsh valleys through Newport. So he was responsible for the first town dock. This had to be built because this was a time of advances in shipping. Ships used to be quite sturdy. They'd tie up alongside the wharves along the river here, and when the tide went out, they'd just fall down onto the riverbank, get it unloaded. When the tide came back in, lift them up, and they'd just sail out. Very robust ships. But this was the time of the clippers, very fast sea clippers. They had very shallow, well, very steep hulls. They couldn't just fall down onto the mud. They would topple over, they would break the back, they'd lose the masts. And so as ships grew faster and bigger, Sir Charles saw that he needed a way of keeping ships afloat while there was unloading and loading, and so he lobbied for and was granted the funds and the power to build the first town dock, which was down at the bottom of the river, on the bend on the river. There was lock gates into the dock. The dock was finished in about 1884. The dock was built and finished in about 1884 to great fanfare. All the bells of the churches were ringing, fireworks, big party. And Sir Charles died about 2 years after that, so he wasn't involved in the building of the new town dock extension, nor the Alexandra dock. That was down to Sir Charles the Younger, and we'll look at that in another video. But he was very much a moderniser, and despite being a big industrialist and commercial investor and banker, his first love, though, was agriculture. And the big agricultural shows he put on down at Tredegar House were major events in Newport. He presented substantial funds in prizes. He modernised the way that agriculture took place in the area. And because of his modernising approach to agriculture, he became a Fellow of the Royal Society. So a very prestigious scientific body, and he was rewarded with a fellowship for that advance in agriculture. As a person, he sponsored many horse races in the area. He funded a poorhouse for the destitute of Newport. He also provided education, although that's not quite so much benevolent. He was an industrialist. This was the start of the Industrial Revolution, and workers needed to have basic knowledge. At least they needed to read and do basic maths. So investing in education really paid for his future expansion of Newport. Now, one of the things with the Combination Acts, or the repeal of Combination Acts, is that his workers did actually strike at some stage, and Sir Charles agreed to pay a minimum wage of 8 shillings a week. It was rejected and he had up the offer. But you've got to consider then that 8 shillings a week was not a vast, he was still not living a great life, but it was much better than many others. The average labouring wage was between 5 and 7 shillings, and also you weren't guaranteed that. If there was no work, you didn't get paid. Whereas Sir Charles guaranteed a fixed minimum wage of 8 shillings a week, making him one of the better employers in the country. So he was also on the board of many charities, and it was said that on his death there was a funeral cortege of over 70 coaches. It was that popular. It was one of the largest funeral entourages outside of a royal funeral procession. So his obituary, he died in 1846. So his obituary stated he was a liberal landlord, well-liked landlord. There was note in Parliament saying that he was a popular landlord. And so the obituary stated a liberal landlord, and nowhere in the Principality was anyone so magnificent in the promotion of the agricultural classes. So great man, big investor in infrastructure, had no fears about using his position as an MP to get what he needed for the town. He spent as wisely and as liberally as he made his money in infrastructure. I could say agriculture was one of his biggest loves, and he personally sponsored and built the Newport cattle market, which was one of the biggest in the country. So that's a quick overview of the man. It's not a history lesson. There's lots there that could be expanded on, but just as a general introduction to Sir Charles Morgan and his impact on the city, and why he's now known as pretty much a father of modern Newport. I think it's one of the a reasonable oversight. So until the next video, thanks for watching.